Quirky thing happened last Saturday as I was going home from our Shabbat Torah study, driving across the swamps. Satellite radio on the classical station, the Sirius Symphonic, was playing Mendelssohn's violin concerto, which is, of course, a spectacular, jubilant piece of music. That was followed by Mendelssohn's piano concerto, which was followed by Mendelssohn's overture to Midsummer Night's Dream. And I said to myself, they're really stuck in a rut here. And finally, at the half-hour station identification, I don't think you call it a disc jockey on a classic station, the host explained that September 6th, last Saturday, they were marking the 1729 birthday of the great German philosopher Moses Mendelssohn by playing the compositions of his grandson Felix Mendelssohn, which struck me funny and satisfies my sense of proportion, because that's the way my mind works. Now, as it happens, wait for it, I'm looking for people who look impressed. My grandma Gross was a Mendelssohn. No, not really, not that kind, and not by choice. When her father, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Kazaskov, got off the boat in Philadelphia in 1907, Philadelphia was a major port of entry, bigger at that point than Boston, although obviously way behind New York, so they had a smaller staff doing customs, immigration, naturalization, and the INS fellow told him, look, it's true that your name getting off the boat has to match the ship's manifest, but you can take another name, because this land of immigrants is a land of freedom, and you can have a fresh start, and nobody here has a name like Kazaskov. So Reb Menachem Mendel was fascinated by the possibilities. He said, how do you choose a name? And this family story goes, this fellow told him, well, just pick a name. You like music? He said, yeah. Who's your favorite composer? Well, if a cultured European Jew was going to have a favorite composer at the turn of the century, who would his favorite composer be? Everyone on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Felix Mendelssohn. So Menachem Mendel Kazaskov, as he was listed in the manifest, formally initially entered the United States as Max Mendelssohn. He dropped Kazaskov to leave Russia behind. And he chose Mendelssohn because Mendel is the Yiddish form of Menachem. It's an explicitly, openly Jewish name. He said, in Europe I had to pass for Slavic. In America, I get to be a Jew. I think it's a cool story. And another new reason to like Mendelssohn's violin concerto. But back to Felix Mendelssohn's grandfather, Moses. After all, last Saturday was his birthday. In 1783, well established in European intellectual circles as a philosopher, Moshe Mendelssohn, being a good, nice Jewish boy with a yeshiva background, he said, how do we tear down the ghetto walls and bring Jews into European society? And so on top of his other philosophical writings, his brilliant essays and lectures, he published Habeur, the Elucidation, a translation of the 5 books of the Torah and the 5 books and 150 chapters of the Psalms, from Hebrew into German. And he had 2 objectives in doing this. Moses Mendelssohn wanted to promote a Jewish cultural revival. As Jews were leaving the ghetto and mainstreaming in society, he wanted to provide a centripetal force that would pull them back and keep them Jewish by making the richness of their own Jewish tradition accessible to them if they weren't Hebrew scholars. The same rationale that prompted the Jewish Publication Society in Philadelphia to publish in 1917 an official Jewish translation of the Bible into English. But while on the one hand, Mendelssohn wanted to keep Jews Jewish, he also wanted them to be studying their Jewish tradition in the vernacular to help them integrate into the Enlightenment society of Europe. And this, my friends, becomes a slippery slope. Just as in the 1920s, the rabbis of the new conservative movement said, well, it's okay to ride in a car on Shabbos if you're going to shul to pray and study Torah and network with Jews. because our cities are getting big enough, you can't live walking distance from a synagogue anymore. But the outcome of that is that by 80 years later, people no longer lived in Jewish communities because you could drive 40 miles to the synagogue if you really wanted to. Same slippery slope. Having the Bible available in German translation may or may not have pulled Jews into their Jewishness by at least making it understandable. But it encouraged assimilation and intermarriage. Moses Mendelssohn's own son, Moses Mendelssohn, son, Abraham, dropped out. Abraham raised his children with no religion. Grandson Felix had no association at all. And notice the name, Felix, a nice Latin, European name meaning joyous. No religion, until he was sort of baptized at 7. When he was 19, they changed the family name from Mendelssohn to Bartholdi. As it happens, they had a distant cousin named Bartholdi who owned a big business. And Felix Mendelssohn's father, Abraham, hoped that maybe if they kissed up and presented themselves as part of the Bartholdi family, when Bartholdi died, he'd at least remember them in his will and maybe leave them the business. But there was another consideration as well, is that Bartholdi was a nice European name. And by breaking away from the name Mendelssohn, as Abraham wrote on a letter to Felix in 1829, when Felix was already a young adult, there can no more be a Christian Mendelssohn than there can be a Jewish Confucius. So here's our inherent irony. My great-grandpa, Mordechai, Menachem Mendel Kozoskov, became Mendelssohn to cut ties with his Slavic past and be openly Jewish, while the folk hero for whom he named himself stopped being Mendelssohn to break free from being Jewish at all. I think you'll agree. In the immortal words of Yul Brynner, as the king of Siam, it is a puzzlement. But, say it with me, to be fair, Felix himself, who was 20 at the time, and his big sister Fanny disliked the name Bartholdi. And dear friends, here is the ultimate revenge. Fast forward a century. In the forced labor and concentration camps of Nazi Europe, the Jews that were brought together in that one place were very often allowed or compelled to form orchestras. And the orchestral groups were allowed to perform whatever music they chose, subject to the approval of the camp commander. So at several of the camps, the orchestras submitted that they wanted to assert their own Jewishness as a spiritual resistance in the face of the Nazis by performing the selections of Mendelssohn. And the commandants crossed it out with a big red pencil. Mendelssohn? It's a Jew name, Jew music? No. So they waited a few days and submitted a new playlist requesting permission to play the works of Bartholdi, which was granted. Spiritual resistance. Shakespeare's Juliet asks, what's in a name? Well, a name that we choose for ourselves can help us claim our legacy. My classmates in rabbi school, Ben Bialek became Chaim. And while we were in Jerusalem, Steve Osachi decided, call me Shaul from now on. A name can also help us renounce our legacy. God knows, everyone here knows how mid-century entertainers were compelled for commercial reasons to change their name as well as their nose. So Bernie Schwartz became Tony Curtis. Lauren Bacall never denied having been born Betty Joan Persky, but she never answered to it. And when she met new people who were Jews and know that she's an MOT, the first thing she would say on being introduced is, please don't call me Betty. And a name can be a back door. to asserting and celebrating and owning our identity at a difficult time, as in the case of concentration camp orchestras performing the works of Bartholdi. We read in the Torah this week, Ki Tavo, how Moses prescribes for the Israelites who are at the 1-yard line right across the river. How once they've entered into the land and subdued it and come into possession of it, that they will take of the first fruits of the land at harvest time 1 basketful and bring it to the national shrine, wherever that will be, and bring it to the high priest, whoever that will be, and put down the basket of fruit and say, I hereby acknowledge that the Lord God of Israel brought us to this land, promised to our forebears to give to us, and this is its fruit. Spiking the ball in the end zone and acknowledging God's faithful promise fulfilled. The theme of our portion is Hakarat Hatov, gratitude for our many blessings, which includes being ourselves as Jews bound together with each other in a land of freedom, where we are free to be Jews and don't have to change our names to pass or our noses, where we can use any name we want and rejoice in being who we are. At this introspective season of Elul, leading downhill through the cycle of the moon to Rosh Hashanah coming up in only a few days, may our cheshbon hanefesh, our daily spiritual inventory that we are doing of ourselves in preparation for the new year, find us asserting the fullest measure of honesty about and taking the fullest measure of joy in who we are, including calling ourselves and each other by name. Shabbat Shalom.